different than a plains rifle in some ways, but they basically have the same basic architecture as the big ones. And the main difference being the nose cap and entry pipe on these plains rifles. Real quickly, in a nutshell, I'm going to have to set this microphone down. A Hawken rifle, there's a lot of misconceptions about it when people look at pictures, and a lot of times that can be deceiving.
Hold it close to his face.
A lot of times it can be deceiving. People think that, first of all, they have a perch belly. Well, there is no belly in the bottom line of the stock. They go straight or slightly concave. Basically the same thing with the top of the comb. It's pretty much a straight line until the last inch or so, then it can kind of fall off into the nose of the comb. Forearm, again, this stuff is all, nothing's really etched in stone. There is no perfect way to describe it. But they generally, you can almost say, never have a belly anywhere in the gun. All this stuff, I call it a swag, a scientific wild ass guess. And you get, the wag part is easy to come up with. Anybody can come up with their ideas and their opinions, and they are just that, opinions and ideas, mine included. You try and attain that wag through study of as many original guns as you can get your hands on. And I photograph and measure, roll them around in my hands, feel them. I get about as much out of feeling a gun as looking at it. And then I come up with my wag from there. My mentor in this stuff was a man named Keith Lubauer, who we talked at length many times about this stuff. And a lot of my wags come from conversation with him. There's nothing really etched in stone. The guns have the basic architecture that I described with no bellies. The barrels, what makes them complicated, the barrels taper, they're wider at the breech, taper narrower at the muzzle. The lock panels taper the opposite direction. They're wider at the front, narrower at the back. And you have to make the lock come into that transition at both angles. They get to be a little complicated put together. These people look at them and think just a plain old half-stock rifle, but they're very far from that. They're actually quite complicated in their own way. People ask about the sights on the rifles. If you look at the original guns, they have a very short front sight compared to what our guns today do. I think that's partially due to how we load the gun. Maybe we use a little more powder than they did. There's really no, I don't have an answer for why it is what it is. They basically were just they're a great gun. They're very complicated, yet simplistic looking. About anything right else offhand, I guess I'll probably take a couple questions and make a conversation and go from there.
What's the difference between the guns like that and what you think of the classic Hawken rifles?
The plains rifle, we need a squirrel rifle versus a plains rifle. First of all, the squirrel rifle are smaller in size, smaller in bore diameter, and they have a different nose cap and entry pipe than most plains rifles. One thing about the squirrel rifles that you don't usually see on the plains rifles is recycled parts. Most of the squirrel rifles that I've seen have used barrels, used locks. They'll have closed dovetails on the barrels. This particular gun, if you look at it, the lock was originally a flint lock. It has the frisson spring, and screw holes are plugged. They just reduce the lock in size to fit the Squirrel rifle. Another difference in the two, the Squirrel rifles generally have what's called a patent breech. It's all one piece. It doesn't unhinge like the plain rifles. That's what it's called. I'm sorry. This is a semi-patent breech. The plain rifles have what's called a patent breech. They're fully developed with the hook, and they come in two pieces to facilitate cleaning and make the gun much easier to take care of. Size is probably the biggest difference. The length of pull on a Squirrel rifle will generally be about the same as, they were made for adults. They weren't kids' guns. And they have another subtle architectural feature that all these things have. It'll make like an S, an exaggerated S. If you take a line from the top of the lock panels down through your wrist, it'll come down the butt and it'll curve up to the corner of the butt plate. It's very subtle. There's no ridge, but if you get in the light, you can see a high spot. The other side has the same thing, but the cheek piece covers a lot of that up. But if you were to remove the cheek piece, it would have that same architecture to it. Generally the Squirrel rifles are brass. There are some iron mounted ones too. Plains rifles are brass ones, but mostly iron mounted. The guns that I've seen, just my way, I would say that probably 80% of the plains rifles are maple stock, the other 20% being walnut. Generally the earlier guns, the really early guns that I have seen, there's a couple of maple ones, but most of them are walnut for whatever reason. I have no idea. And you can see an evolution in architecture from the early guns to the later ones. The early ones, they're different. And we have some early guns and some late ones, both originals and reproductions, up at the Sappington house up here behind us. It's well worth it's way up there on top of the hill by itself, but it's well worth the walk up there. So hopefully everybody, when we get done here, will come up there and see what we have on display and continue the conversations from there. Questions and everything else like that. The plains rifles, which are bigger caliber, normally you look and think of a plains rifle as being 47 to plus caliber bigger. The Squirrel rifles generally are 40 or smaller. Squirrel rifles generally are single key, where the plains rifles have two. That's about the only, in a nutshell, that's about the only differences in the two. Really, architecturally, they're the same.
What years were the Hawken rifle predominant?
There's really, I don't know if anything is really documented or written down to this, but we surmise that the brothers formed a partnership in 1822. They were originally from Maryland. Christian Hawken was their father, very well known and respected Kentucky rifleman. And there were a bunch of boys, and I can't begin to tell you how many, 6 or 8 sons. Well, Sam went to Xenia, Ohio for a few years, and Jacob came to St. Louis around 1811 or 12 as guest. He formed a partnership with a man named James Lakeman, and they did. They built some guns. I'm sure they built guns, and they did a lot of repair for immigrants going west. They formed a partnership in 1822, and they built the guns. Well, Jacob died in the cholera epidemic in 1849. So you can look at the barrel marks on a gun, and if they say J&S Hawken, it's generally accepted that those are 1849 or earlier. If they say S Hawken, then they're after Jacob died. It's pretty much accepted. another wagon accepted. The shop was sold in the 1860s, changed hands a couple of times. A man named J.P. Gimmer wound up owning the shop and running it until 1919. He closed the doors in 1919. The last years it was mostly a sporting goods dealer. I'm sure he sold some guns, he sold all kinds of breech loaders and things like that, with some land of these things eventually. But Gimmer closed the shop in 1919, so basically 100 years they were.
I got one more question. Did they use, I've been meaning to ask you this too, did they use like mass production, like did they make a whole bunch of locks, you know, and have them fit where they would cross over from one gun to the other, or were they just hand fit?
No, the parts don't interchange. I mean, even the keys don't interchange.
Okay.
They use a lot of commercial locks. You see Gosher locks on a lot of them. They made their own locks in a lot of instances. And I think, and this is just my way, they had the ability to make any part that they needed. If they needed a butt plate one day and they were out of castings, they fired up the forge and made butt plates. You see, generally the early guns will all be forged parts made from sheet metal. The nose cap, the entry pipe, all that stuff. The butt plates are two pieces. Then as they progressed, they used, and I don't know what year any of this stuff started, they gradually transitioned to cast parts. You can look inside original cast butt plates, and you can see the remnants of the brass that they used to raise the parts together. What they would do is they'd take the two pieces, make the two pieces fit them, and put a rivet to hold the parts together. And then they would take scrap brass, chunks of brass. You see a lot of times on the original gun, you'll see like square chunks of, small chunks of brass that didn't melt when they put it in the forge to weld these things. And you see on the cast butt plates, you'll see remnants of those pieces in the bottom. So they were taking an original two-piece plate and making a mold from that to make the castings. And you see, I mentioned before, you see mixed parts on the guns. I have an original that has a cast nose cap and a sheet metal entry pipe and a cast butt plate. But again, I think that's just whatever part they needed that day. If they were out of them, they did what they had to do to make them. And as far as, well, there is no interchangeability to them. The guns are, no two are exactly alike, but Jake and Sam didn't build all. They had several workers over there from time to time. So you get variations from, maker to maker within the shop. Nobody knows for sure, when you think about it, they had no electric lights, they had no electric motors, they worked from daylight to dusk and did all that they could. It's quite an accomplishment when you think about how when I built it down, I got, lights and a milling machine and all that they were not lucky enough to have.
What calibers did they make them in, and why? That's another question I've been wondering.
Generally, the Squirrel rifles were small calibers, 36 to 40, roughly.
For a Squirrel?
Big squirrel.
Big Squirrel. Yeah, the plains rifle, you see them anywhere. You think of a plains rifle should be a pretty good sized caliber for the shoot longer distance, bigger game. Most of them, I would say about 47 caliber minimum, on up to 60 caliber guns.
Did they ever make them for bullets, like with a tighter twist? Or was it always balls?
The guns, most of the guns you see were for a round ball. There are a couple of target rifles, and I don't know with the red twist whether they're for a round ball or bullet. personally seen one that I could say was a bullet gun.
I say, with the
I'm not saying
basket,
they didn't make them, I'm just saying that,
okay, most of them are like 166 twists for a ball.
yes, you have, they say, in the book, they say 48-inch twists. Certainly not slower than that, or not faster than that.
I say, yeah.
But yeah, I think they varied. I think when they built the guns, the original ones, the loops in the barrel are staked in generally. You see a few of them that are dovetailed in. Most of them are staked in, they're done quite deeply. In my opinion, the barrels probably were somewhat green when they built the gun. The reason I say that is when they stake those loops in, it goes quite deep into the barrel, and it has to displace some metal into the bore. My opinion is they had to put the stakes in and then finish ream the guns and then rifle them after that. I have a piece of original Hawken barrel that was an amputee, which is very common with them. It had the barrel was cut off, and it had a sight dovetail in it. And the restorer, when he stretched the barrel, wanted to do on the barrel on and cut it off behind the dovetail. Well, I have the original piece of barrel. And I had a pretty early, that's off the original gun. I drove a lead slug through that piece of barrel, and it fits my gun perfectly, right? Same configuration, same bore. So it tells me they had to have been doing that in the shop rather than order a barrel, which they could have done too, nobody knows. As far as barrel length, I've seen two original uncut original Hawken rifles that were, there was like a brand new J&S Hawken rifle that had about a 30-inch barrel. And the Kit Carson gun is another famous gun. It's like a 31 and a fraction length. On those guns, the original short barrel guns, the forearm is shorter also. They're in proportion. They're in proportion. You see, there's talk about they built short barrel guns. Well, in my opinion, they didn't build a short barrel gun with one rod pipe and a long forearm. The forearms here, the barrels, that much more. It tells me the gun was cut off. Got any other questions?
Bob, today I think a lot of the builders are putting cap boxes on the butt. Of the originals, approximately what percent do you think came out of the Hawken factory with cap boxes?
That's real hard, real difficult to say. If I was to make just a blind guess, I would say less than 10% of them had boxes.
So it's really rare.
Relatively rare, yeah. But then again, you look at a lot of the original guns, you see have boxes. Maybe they were given a little better care and not used up as, nobody really knows. And if they tell you they know, they're going to believe it.
What about the early, is there some actual copies left of flintlock full stuff?
That's another question that gets brought up all the time. I've had probably 100 of the original Hawkins in my hands. And of the guns that I have observed and studied, I have seen one that was a St. Louis, obviously a St. Louis gun. It just says Hawken on the top of the barrel. There's no initials, no St. Louis. And it's a full stock gun, original flint, never been converted. But the gun architecturally doesn't look like we think the St. Louis Hawken should look. It's it's probably the earliest gun known. Certainly the earliest one that I know of. People ask about the later style guns and will you make a flintlock? Well, I don't do them. Some guys do and they love them. I just don't go there with them. It's not.
No, I knew you didn't do them. I was just wondering if there's any actual, you say you've seen a real one that
I've
was.
seen one real one, and I've seen one barrel of a gun that burned up in a fire, and the breech was out of it, and you could see where it had a touch hole at one time that was plugged.
I see.
So was it a converted gun, or was it a recycled barrel? That's the question. The same deal with the Smithsonian Hawken. People look at that and say, oh, that, was a flintlock. Well, maybe it was, or maybe it wasn't. Probably not. Nobody can say for sure.
So if they have more questions, where do they go? You're going to be back?
Yes, we will be up at the Sapperton House, which is, if you look, as a crow flies, it's straight across and up on the hill. We've got a gun that belonged to a steamboat captain in St. Louis, on a fleet of steamboats, and it's the fanciest screamer that's known. And it's worth the trip up the hill just to see that one gun. There's three or four of us that put on, 5 of us that put on a display in that building. And there's some really cool stuff up there. You need to make a hike up the hill to see the stuff.
Yeah, that steamboat gun you said, that is the fanciest Hawken that anybody knows of, is that right?
Yes, there's another silver mounted Hawken, but it's not quite it's a later gun than this one, and it doesn't have all the foo-for-all that this one has. I can't describe it, you just have to come up and see it.
Did Hawken make them in their factory like that, the display type gun? Yeah.
Well, they made that one.
Okay, I was wondering if that Creamer guy fell into that one at all.
Well, Philip Kramer was, in my mind, probably one of the best ever anywhere.
He was from DuPont, correct?
Well, no, he was from Maryland. He settled in DuPont.
Okay.
And his house is here in pieces somewhere. Margie was working towards getting that house taken apart, moved here, resurrected, which hasn't been rebuilt yet. And as far as I know, there's no plans to do it. But the house is here, and so hopefully eventually we'll be able to see it.
Let's do it. I'll supervise.
There's a Hawken up in the Buffalo Bill Museum.
Cody?
Is this gun similar to that? Or is that the same gun?
That gun was in the Buffalo Bill Historical Society. A funny story about that. We were up there, and it was in its own plexiglass box, mounted, sitting on a rack inside that box, and I'm taking pictures of it, trying to observe it as best I can.
Don't hang your head.
My lovely, lovely dainty wife, she's flitzing around and she bumped the case. And when she bumped the case, the gun went I'm taking more pictures and go, bump it again. And then now we're able to get the gun in our hands. So you need to see it.
It's unbelievable. I've seen it.
Yeah, it's the only known truly dated Hawken rifle. It's dated 1830. The Medina gun is 1833. Says on the thing on the box. The gun is not that early. It's a lot of this stuff get things added to it later on in its life, and it's not really may not be correct.
One of the things that I wanted to mention about this sharp sights on the rifles is that when people bought these rifles, they tend to use them on a daily basis. So when they brought them up to their shoulder, their gun was right on. For running game, there's nothing like that. You can't leave a gun that comes right up with the sights on running game. And I think that these people use their guns on a daily basis, and they like the sharp sights because they can kill running game with that gun.
It's possible. It's possible.
My opinion, that's all it is.
I know if we take an original gun like this one, say we were to load it like we do today with normal, it's a 40 caliber gun, say 50 grains of powder, whatever, patch ball, the gun's going to shoot really high, with that short sight. Why that is, maybe they didn't load their guns with a tight fitting powder. It's, they're a combination, as anybody's guess.
And they wanted to save the ball when they took it out of the animal so they could reuse it.
They did that, yeah. Yeah.
I appreciate all the work you're doing on sharing that with us.
All I just request, come up and see the stuff up at the staffing house. It's well worth the trip.
I walk. Is this the last question? I have one last question. Is it true on or about 1982 during spring turkey season you mistakenly shot a peacock?
Bullshit.
Just curious.
Is that what they're for you, Tail Hawken?
Hello, my name is Pablo, and I have a kind of an unusual mountain story for you. It only lasts about 15 minutes, and I'm extremely cautious about my audience here.
That was nice. Enjoyed it.
I tell this story very